take a bike or a scooter and avoid making a transfer on a bus or a train line and actually get home for dinner or get home for bedtime with the kids. Right now, riders can take a Lime trip using the Uber app. We are really proud that 99.99% of all trips are incident free.
Welcome back to Built in America. I'm your host, Sam Mahmood, and today we're sitting down with a special guest, Andrew Savage, one of the founding members here at Lime, known as the disruptive scooter and electric bicycle company. Andrew's been at the forefront of Lime and scaling the business to over $500 million of valuation. Today we'll dive into his journey and the pivotal moments of building Lime and the future of electronic transportation. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Excited to have a conversation.
Likewise, Andrew. I just wanted to kind of start the conversation here and tell us a little bit about your background. I know you grew up in a small town in Vermont. I think it'd be awesome for the audience to kind of hear where you came from and how you kind of transitioned into working at a big corporate company like Lime.
Sure. Maybe the first time I've heard us referred to as a corporate company. It still feels very much like a startup. But so I did grow up in rural northeastern Vermont. On a dirt road that we had to maintain to just get through during the winter time. And in many ways, the upbringing of being in a rural area, as many folks who may have grown up in similar places around the country or world might resonate, is, you sort of are ingrained with a sense of work ethic and a conservation ethic. And that was something that certainly came to me from a very early age. I mean, we, did everything from cutting wood on our property to heat the house through the winter, to helping my parents in the garden for food that we ate. And so in many ways, the sort of conservation, land, and hard work ethic pretty well translated to the startup world. And I did have a stop along the way working in government, in politics, where I worked on policies like climate policy, which became a passion of mine. But felt the startup environment to be a real natural fit, just given the environment that I grew up in.
And you were one of the founding members at Lime very early on, is that correct?
I was, yes.
And can you walk me through, like, when you guys first started creating Lime? I think the audience would love to know how a company like that gets started. There are so many factors that go into play. You have inventory, an app, you have distribution, you have a global network now that you guys are putting bicycles and scooters all over the world. It just sounds like a 800-pound gorilla. Where does someone start to build a company like that?
Oh my gosh, it's a huge question, and I still have, if folks know the ringtone when you unlock a scooter or bike around the world, it has remained the same for the last 7+ years. And that ringtone was being tested in our first office, which was the size of, maybe it was 300 square feet, so it was tiny. But, I think where it started was an idea, which was that we could leverage an emergence of GPS location with the ubiquity of smartphones to help solve a transportation challenge. So, prior to, much before 2017, GPS wasn't as widely available. And once you had GPS being widely available and able to communicate regularly, you could put it on more distributed things. And in our case, it was a pedal bike. Before 2017, you didn't have wide availability or utilization of smartphones. And suddenly you had people have the ability to locate things on GPS, pay for things on their smartphone, and make a trip. And in this case, that enabled people to have access to the bikes we were offering. And then third, we paired the sort of notion with a desire to solve what was considered the last mile challenge in transportation of cities, which is really a reference to getting sort of the final mile or the first mile, candidly, from public transportation to your final destination or vice versa. And so we were able to marry the emergence of technology with a challenge that we saw existing in cities around the globe and develop what we thought was a really interesting business. And it obviously took capital to build the business, to hire the team, to develop a product, to build the app, to do all the logistics. But really, it started there with sort of notion of marrying technology with solving a problem.
And talk to me a little bit about a team. I think, when I'm building something today, the first thing I think about, even prior to creating the thesis, is I think about the team I can go build first. I call it like, how do you build the basketball team, right? And when doing so, like, what were the pieces that you were trying to build, you and the founding team together, before getting the first product to market?
Yeah, I mean, it started out with 7 or 8 of us, and really we were trying to cover the various, core competencies that the company needed to have, and we've hit on a few of them, including having hardware. So we had to have a supply chain and hardware lead. We had someone who was working on the technology side of developing the app, both the app that the rider would use, and then the app that our operations team would leverage to manage the fleet. My role really was around government relations and partnerships with cities. And the recognition was very early on that we were going to have to approach things very differently from how, for example, Uber or Airbnb was approaching the market 3 or 4 years prior, where in their case, the rules and regulations within cities were very ambiguous, but they were able to operate and find ways to operate without a lot of structure to their market entry. It was clear from the early stages that we were going to have to approach government relations differently, that we were going to need to work hand in hand with cities and build partnerships because, frankly, we needed to utilize the public space to be parking our vehicles during the day and overnight, right? And, so we developed a strategy, and my role was to sort of figure out how to get into cities. And, I'll be really candid, early on, just because we thought we had a great idea and a great product and great funding, I was making phone calls to New York City and Austin and Chicago. And in reality, we weren't ready for those cities, and they weren't ready for us. So what we did instead was we pivoted to building trust with smaller cities. We had zero operational experience. We had no references within cities at the time. We hadn't been operating in any markets. And I remember actually a really specific conversation with the former mayor of Philadelphia, who was somewhat of an informal advisor. And I remember him sort of pounding on the table. I won't do that now to disturb your audio. But essentially he was saying, you've got to crawl, you've got to walk, you've got to run. And he repeated, he said, crawl, walk, run. And that's exactly the strategy that we took was, crawling was build trust with initial cities. And so we went to places like Greensboro, North Carolina, where the university welcomed us. We went to Lake Tahoe, a market that we still operate. We then were able to move into Seattle, where they had a failing bike share system and wanted what was called dockless bikes at the time, which is what we were offering. And so we sort of built our experience in that sort of crawl, walk, run model to build trust, build experience, and build know-how so that we could run a good business. And I think that proved to be really the right strategy, because if you remember 2017, there were dozens of bike share companies trying to do a similar thing. And I'm not sure I can name many that are still around today.
Correct. Andrew, if I'm like a city councilor, city governance, and you were calling me today, I think the audience would appreciate, what are the things you're going to tell me to sell me to put Lime on the public streets?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, first and foremost, I think bike share, scooter share is an integral part of a real transportation network, that you can't just have the sort of longer haul trips of a train system or a bus. You certainly don't want to rely just on ride hailing or private vehicles because of congestion and carbon and local pollution, et cetera. And so I see us as providing an essential service to markets that we want to serve. And in fact, the pandemic, if it sort of taught us one thing, and we can talk about that a bit later if you're interested, about how it impacted the business, but we were actually at the time deemed an essential service. Prior to 2020, we were sort of a disruptor, and we were looking at cities and looking at, we were seen as sort of disrupting the status quo of transportation. And lo and behold, the pandemic in many markets actually codified us as an essential service, which I thought was a really sort of interesting pivot or an inflection point for the company. But what we talk to cities about all the time is, how can we help them solve the challenges they have around transportation? And then there are all these auxiliary benefits to doing so. You can lower carbon, for example. You can free up space from cars that are parked 96% of their lives to make things like public housing more available, or on-street eateries, or parks, things like that. So you can actually utilize public space that's now dominated by car parking in a much more effective and livable way. And also, local businesses love us because people who ride bikes and scooters within cities, empirically, they spend more within the community. They stop more because they don't have to find parking. They're more connected to the community. And so, in many ways, we can create what is a much more vibrant city environment. And that's what we're offering to cities. And we're thrilled that so many cities have seen what we are offering and then are doubling down and expanding our programs throughout them.
Yeah, I think you make some really good points there. And one thing I want to underscore is obviously you called a bunch of cities and then they're probably getting phone calls from other competitors as well, to assume, right? But then Lime has stood out and has been a reputable company since, the early stage of when electronic bikes and electronic scooters have started, right? There's only a few that have lasted thus far. Lime has a very memorable green color. It's eco-friendly. Tell me a little about the brand. Have you guys built the brand from the very beginning, and then why it stood out different than most companies?
Yeah, I mean the brand was always a fusion. Well, it was initially a fusion of sort of greens and yellows. We've sort of pivoted more just into sort of the green sphere, but in many ways, the notion of lime was, you limes tend to add spice and fun and levity to things. Citrus has a way of being sort of, a fruit that, I think brings enjoyment. And we've sort of leaned into that. And we certainly have leaned into the commitment to our green color in terms of sustainability. And that's something, obviously, really proud of how far this company has come on the sustainability front. But I think we also, in many ways, have developed a really authentic presence with our riders and with the public through social media and other areas that I'm just really proud of the team. I think that the team has done such a phenomenal job of speaking authentically, of adding some fun to the business, and really providing people something that they can smile about and enjoy using at the same time.
So how did you create that network effect where, you start putting bikes out there on the streets and you start putting scooters out there on the streets and then it just starts taking virality, right? Was it an influencer base? Like, how does someone get such massive scale so quickly? Because prior to COVID, it just started, it was taking off. And then during COVID, I saw it just take off like no other. And I know I saw Uber back to you guys as well. Where does that viral effect really come from?
To be honest, in many ways, the bikes and the scooters on the street sell themselves. We spend very, very, very little on marketing, in part because just being there and being available is most of the battle. And so what we did instead was we focused really acutely on building those city relationships so that we could have those scooters out on the street and so they could market themselves. So we really have invested in, spent time on, and built a team around having a city's first approach as a business, and really trying to delight cities and meet their expectations or exceed their expectations to allow us to double down on the service that we can provide. And so in many ways, the growth and the network effect that you're referencing really came from being able to be offered in so many markets around the globe.
I mean, it's quite unique business model to have almost free marketing once your product's out there, right? And now I believe you're about in 250 markets worldwide. Is that right?
It's 280. Yeah.
280. And obviously, you guys have built such a very successful business. But with anything, there's always a little bit of complications along the way. And when I walk by at night and see limes out there, there's guys with big vans charging these scooters up and charging these bikes up. There's a lot of supply chain issues, I'm sure, as well. And you have those incidents where people are maybe driving somewhat intoxicated on these bikes that can be a little bit of an issue. What are some of the challenges that you guys have faced along the way when building Lime?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked really hard to help address some of those challenges that you referenced, and I think that's a really important part of the business and important part of our success. I mean, for example, in many markets, we provide or require a sobriety test for riders that want to begin a ride late at night to ensure that they are safe to ride. And it's interesting that it's something that isn't required right now of 2 or 3 thousand pound vehicles, but is something that we do to help the safety of our riders and our communities. We are really proud that 99.99% of all trips are incident free, that people have learned to adopt and ride our vehicles and integrate them into their daily lives as they have. And that's something that's obviously, an exciting part of running the business. We also are doing things around parking where we are offering and providing hotspots where we encourage people to park in hotspots and help ensure parking is available where cities would like it, and ensure that parking is available in places where people are going to utilize our transportation, such as near public transportation. So we're constantly looking at solutions, whether it be from a safety perspective or a sustainability perspective or a city friendliness perspective, to help bolster our service, to make sure that we're a service that really integrates within the community.
What I like about Lime a lot is that you guys probably have a lot of really good data behind what you guys do, in the sense that you guys are testing a bunch of different markets. And I'm sure there's a little bit of cultural differences when putting, limes in Santa Monica, California versus Paris, right? Tell me a little about those different cultural differences when putting bikes and scooters globally. What has worked, and then what does not work sometimes, based off the city that you're putting the bikes in, the scooters in.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right that there are immense cultural differences within the markets that we operate, especially when you're going from, for example, North America to Europe to the Middle East. In cities with really strong public transportation networks, cities like Paris or Copenhagen, London, micromobility is really seen as a complement to existing transit options. We saw this firsthand with the Olympics in Paris this summer, where we did over 1 million trips in 2 weeks. We increased our fleet. We offered a fleet in some of the more suburban areas that were still providing services for the Olympics. And you could really see how the integration of micromobility into the city fabric could just work so well. In North American cities where public transportation is less robust, you're often seeing situations where we are supplementing, or in some ways, filling in a gap where public transportation just doesn't exist. And I think it's really encouraging when you hear rider stories about what that means to riders. So someone who can, for example, take a bike or a scooter and avoid making a transfer of on a bus or a train line, and actually get home for dinner or get home for bedtime with the kids. Like, that's the kind of stuff that's like real life stuff that matters to people, that we have an influence on every day. And I think that's obviously really encouraging, being in the business. But back to the sort of cultural differences, we have teams on the ground in all of these markets, so we're able to adapt, operate, give local autonomy to those local teams so that they can modify the program based on cultural differences as well.
Yeah, that makes very unique points. And we talked a little about COVID, and I'm sure COVID for every business, and I'm always curious about this on this podcast, is like, what did COVID do to the business, right? You guys had probably launched, I believe, in 30 plus countries around COVID time. The pandemic shut a lot of things down, but then I think it exponentially grew your business, if I'm correct, just because now you had a little bit more transportation. It was outdoors. Walk me through some of those turbulent times of what you saw during COVID, if it was exponentially more valuable for you, or if it was a decline in the business, and like what you guys did to go pivot throughout that process.
Yeah, I mean, COVID was absolutely brutal on the business. And I remember waking up one day when, the peak of the sort of the beginning of the pandemic, and seeing, we get a ride report of where trips are happening around the globe by market. And we had shut down every single market except for South Korea. No one was traveling, no one was going to work, no one was going to restaurants. So it was really, really tough for a transportation business as we are. But what it allowed us to do was take that moment to double down on running a really better business, focused on the unit economics, focused on better hardware, really focused on just running, a strong business. So in some ways, often people say, there's nothing like a crisis to make you focus, to really clarify things. And we faced that crisis, and I think we met that challenge head on. at that time, we also made a commitment to our hardware where we redesigned the vehicle. We committed to an internal hardware team, which we had always had, but we really doubled down on it. And we committed to a swappable battery model, which has proved instrumental for both the business and sustainability, where we could charge batteries in a warehouse and swap fully charged batteries for batteries that needed to be charged out on the street, rather than the prior model, which was taking the full vehicle, the bike or the scooter, all the way back to a charging depot or a warehouse and then returning it to the street. So both from an operational perspective, from a cost perspective, from an uptime perspective, that swappable model has really proven to be incredibly beneficial. And certainly from a sustainability perspective, it cut emissions and impacts of operating the fleet in half. And so, we, back to the pandemic, faced all those challenges, but it allowed us to clarify the challenges that we had within the company. And then as we came out of the pandemic, demand for socially distanced outdoor transportation surged. And I certainly wouldn't say that it was immediate because, as you recall, it took a while for people to start to travel again for pleasure. It took a while for people to head back into work. But as people did all of those things, we were there, ready, waiting, and those vehicles were ready to be out on the street marketing themselves, and we're happy to have met the demand.
Yeah, I mean, I remember during COVID, bicycle sales had exponentially increased in volume, and every bike shop around the world, especially around the U.S., these guys were selling it like no other. In terms of Lime, you get right now. You guys have two products, I assume, correct? It's the scooter and it's the electronic bike. Are there any other verticals that you guys are maybe looking into today that could expand the overall business? Curious to see your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and when we think about expansion, I think there's two areas we think about. One is geographic expansion, and the other is product expansion. From a geographic perspective, it is both expanding within markets that we operate. I mean, we love nothing more than to be operating in a market and have that city or that region say, you know what, you might be offering 5,000 scooters or bikes, but why don't we go at a 10 because it's working so well. So essentially, it's going deeper within the markets that we currently serve. Then there's also expansion into new markets. For example, we just launched this summer in Tokyo, Japan. We launched in Athens. We're looking to expand into Mexico. So there's geographic expansion, but then there's also product expansion. So we are often thinking about, all right, how can we serve more trips to more people? So that could be longer trips. It could be to a more diverse population. And so we launched earlier this year two pilot vehicle types. One, Lime Bike, which is sort of back to our original name, which essentially is a smaller form factor bike, smaller wheels, smaller step over. And that's in response to feedback we heard, particularly from women who wanted a more accessible vehicle. And so we really want to be able to be attractive to women, men, whoever wants to take a trip. And then the second thing is we launched a vehicle called the Lime Glider, which is kind of a hybrid between a scooter and an e-bike, where it is a sit-down, pedal-free, pedal-less bike, kind of like a small moped. It's kind of a hybrid between all those things. And the hope there is that we can be attractive to yet another set of riders that might want the ease of hopping on a vehicle, might want to sit down, might want to travel farther than they might want to stand on a scooter. So really, we've heard great feedback from initial rider testings even before we piloted these vehicles. And so far in the market that they're being offered in Atlanta, in Seattle, in Zurich, it's going really well. So we're really encouraged by how those are being received.
I'm really excited to try that if you bring it out here to the Southern California area. There's a lot of self-driving vehicles happening today. You see Tesla, Waymo, Robotaxi. Does Lime foresee itself kind of entering that arena whatsoever, trying to keep up with the trend of these self-driving automated vehicles and capturing that momentum that's happening today?
Yeah, no plans to announce today on that. I did have a chance to ride autonomous Waymo a few weeks ago, and it was a truly eye-opening experience. If for those who haven't had a chance, I was initially, I don't know, maybe a little reticent, and I left feeling totally blown away by the experience and the technology. It's certainly something that is, on the rise. I think what we're most focused on in that sort of what touches into that realm is our partnership with Uber, where we are integrated within the Uber app. Obviously, they have a real interest in autonomous vehicles as well, and have plenty of stake in that space. But right now, riders can take a Lime trip using the Uber app. Sometimes if they're looking for a trip and it's a short distance trip, it's an easy click where you can say, you know what, it's actually going to be cheaper. It's going to be faster to take a bike or a scooter. Might be more fun as well. And that's a big referral for trips for us. And, Uber, as you mentioned, referenced earlier, made an investment in us right around 2020. And so, they're on the cap table. They're a significant part of the trips that are generated for us. And we love the integration because we think any chance we can take folks from a private vehicle or shared vehicle to a scooter or bike trip is going to be a good thing.
I mean, I think it's massive that Uber invested in you guys. And I want to maybe reference, like, I know one of your competitors, Bird, is out there as well. They caught my attention because they actually went public. I remember seeing them go public at like a $2.5 billion valuation, and then they fell off the stock market because they couldn't, sustain a $15 million market cap. And then Uber decides to invest in you guys, and that says a lot about you guys because now you have their distribution on their app, which is widely used globally. Correct? Now today, yeah, now today you're competing for real estate on the market when you're calling cities and so forth, and you're saying, I'm Lime, I'm competing against Bird and these other vendors as well. What did Uber see in you guys that they maybe didn't see in Bird or someone else?
Well, it's hard to explicitly say what they saw in us, not being on that side of the table. But what I would conjecture they saw in us is one, a company that was really committed to running really good operations. If you remember at the time when they invested in us, they actually had their own competing micromobility service called Jump. So they were in the space. They had bikes, they had scooters. What they saw in Lime was that we really knew how to run strong operations. I think they also saw a really strong government relations team that understood what cities were looking for out of micromobility. And they saw a really strong hardware team that could execute on continuous innovation. And so hard to say exactly what they saw in us, but we were happy to be partners. We were happy to have their investment. And I think it's really propelled the company forward to be able to have so many more eyeballs on our product, to be able to see the ease of being able to book bike or scooter, not just on Google Maps, but on a platform where you were potentially looking for a car to begin with.
I mean, that's quite impressive. And micromobility is, I think, a very unique niche, right? When building such a product today, you guys obviously brought a team of experts in order to do so. Tell me a little about the CEO, the founder, and how he was able to kind of build his team around his vision of Lime and what he was able to execute over the last 6, 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, Will, we've had a change of the CEO sort of midway through, right around the pandemic. But I would say in both leaders, both in Toby and in Wayne, both have had a steadfast commitment to the mission of the company. The mission being, how can we solve transportation challenges? How can we reduce carbon emissions? And how can we integrate within cities and become indispensable to cities and riders? And by remaining focused on those principles, I think that's allowed us to stand out and to really fulfill those mission principles. So, I think while in many ways leadership can change, the sort of mission and drive of the company hasn't. And I think we've been well served across the board.
And Andrew, I think something the audience and even myself are always curious about is as companies like yours scale super fast, there can be a little bit of regret scaling too fast, right? So as you guys are scaling and so forth, what is something to look out for in a company like Lime or any other large company when moving too fast in revenue, and then you start probably eating into a lot of your profits? How do you kind of manage that process throughout the timeline?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, it's remaining, humble about where you are at. I think with fast-growing companies, it's easy to be attracting press attention. It may be easy to be attracting financial investment. Maybe easy at the time to be attracting, gobs and gobs of employees applying for every job that you have listed. But I think it's super, super important to remain humble, knowing that, as we found from the pandemic, which we talked about a few minutes ago, anything can happen and you just don't know what's lurking around the corner. And so remaining humble about what the mission is and about where you're at along that journey, I think is incredibly important. I also think remaining, focused on the mission is really important. And, we always had a sustainability mission at the company, but in the very early years, it was really hard to have that come front and center. We were in survival mode, right? We were in competition mode. We were trying to get into markets and win market share. We were developing new products. It was really hard to be doubling down or focused on sustainability. On the flip side, we at a certain point around 2019, 2020, reached a point where sustainability was going to be critical to our success and our growth. I'm really happy to share that in 2023, we grew the business year over year by 32%, but we cut emissions by 16%. So had a 32% growth and a 16% reduction in carbon at the same time as we had that growth. And that's really hard to do, but it is done by running a much stronger business. And so I think what we learned is that we could grow and grow rapidly and remain sort of true to the mission that we had.
Where do you see the future of Lime today?
Oh man, I mean, I see us expanding into more geographic territories, new products, doubling down within the markets that we currently serve, and really staying, focused on the core business and providing a service that delights our customers. And when I say customers, I think about two things: one, cities; two, our riders, because we really have to be thinking about both always at the same time.
Andrew, you've obviously scaled multiple businesses. You've been part of this Lime journey for a long time. If I was a young entrepreneur today, wanting to go start something and create a really good product, as Lime is a fantastic product, how would you frame that process out today? Someone just maybe is leaving YC, you're in the Silicon Valley today. And what I think about Lime is how fantastic the product is, how user friendly, the less friction there is, the easier the product will be used, correct? And if I'm curious today how to go start that, give me some advice for the audience that they can go start that mission today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's being really clear about the problem that you're trying to solve. That's really important. So in our case, the problem we were trying to solve was that last mile, first mile problem. I think second is, are you sure about the solution, or do you have a sense that the solution is the right fit? And they're better experts than I am to determine a product market fit, but to really know whether or not what you're trying to solve can be solved by the sort of notion, the idea that you're bringing to the table. And then third, I think it's just so critical to build a great team. It's hard to build a good team. It takes really deliberate work. It takes time. It takes effort. But that's absolutely the most important thing. Those are the people that you're going to surround yourself with. Those are the people that are going to be in the tough conversations around the table, solving the challenges, and that you're going to rely on to carry the various spheres of the company that you're developing. And so, it is worth over indexing towards ensuring good team leaders. We didn't always get it right. I don't think any company ever does, but spending extra time in that space, I think, is well worth it. So really, it's what problem are you solving? Are you solving it the right way? And are you building the right team for execution?
I mean, that's admirable advice. I think people will take that to the heart, and showing how you guys built Lime obviously is the credibility that you guys can show that the advice given there is something that people can take on for their future endeavors. Um, Andrew, the way we finish Built in America, I always ask a series of questions. They're rapid fire. They keep you on your toes a little bit. So you ready for this? It's about 4 or 5 questions.
Oh man, I don't know. I guess I have to say I'm ready for it. I don't know if there's much choice. Is there? Can I duck out right now?
There's no choice.
All right. All right. I'm in. I'm in.
First question: what social media account do you enjoy the most today?
All right. I don't do a lot of social media, but there's this guy named, I think his handle's Coach Ball Game on Instagram, and he has hilarious and practical baseball coaching advice. And I am an aspiring first year baseball coach to a 7-year-old.
There you go. I like it. This is a good one. One of my favorite questions. Money is not an issue. What company are you buying today?
But maybe we buy Uber.
Ah, smart man.
It'd be kind of a funny twist. Yeah, I think the integration is too nice not to want to keep a nice tight connection to that company. So yeah, we'll buy Uber today.
There you go. Was one tool or resource you cannot live without today? Don't say your phone.
Oh, definitely not my phone. Bike pump.
So you're a biker.
I'm a biker, but I also like when I see people riding around on the streets and their tires are flat, I just so badly want to jump out of the car with a bike pump. I don't do this, but I am pretty close to doing this where I'm just have a bike pump on hand at any time. So if there's a red light, I can just go add 20 psi to anyone's tires.
You are a passionate man. Let me tell you, man. I love that. Who is the best person in business you've ever interacted with?
I would say so. Carol Browner was the former EPA administrator under President Clinton for 8 years, the youngest ever as well, the only person to have done it for 8 years. She was also the climate advisor to President Obama in the White House. She came on as an advisor to us at Lime early on in 2019. And she has incredible business savvy. She has public board member experience, has a complete handle of sustainability and climate issues. And so I would say, we interact fairly regularly, and I just think incredibly highly of her. She's a total rock star. If you ever get a chance to hear her speak.
And what's next for you on your entrepreneurial path for the next 5 years with Lime and so forth? Where do you see yourself?
Oh man, I'm really focused on continuing to make the progress that we're making at Lime. I love also helping early stage impact startups. I advise a few companies, and in those companies, the journey we've been on at Lime can be really instructive and really helpful, and it's just fun to be able to sort of bestow some experience on sort of earlier journeys. And then otherwise, I'm into coaching baseball and supporting two young kids, and maybe soon taking out a bike pump and pumping up people's tires on the side of the road. So we'll see.
That's an all-star answer right there. I tell you that. Andrew, it's been awesome having you on. You've been a rock star. Where can people find more about you and Lime?
Oh, find us at li.me. I'm on LinkedIn, and so is the company, and we'd love to be in touch.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew.